The camera lens shimmered in the Pacific sun as Lieutenant Robert "Cowboy Stout's Hellcat sliced through the humid air above Peleliu. It was September 12, 1944. The sky was calm, the mission routine, reconnaissance only. Photograph the northern airfield, report back to the USS Hornet, and let the strategists decide what came next. That was it. Simple, but nothing in war ever stays simple for long. As Stout leveled his aircraft and gazed through the viewfinder, the still island below erupted into detail, hangars intact, fuel drums glittering like coins in the sun, and rows upon rows of Japanese aircraft lined so tightly their wingtips nearly touched. Zeros, bombers, attack planes, more than he could count in one glance. They weren't abandoned relics. They were armed, fueled, and waiting. In that frozen instant, Stout understood the terrible truth. In just 3 days, 28,000 U.S. Marines would be landing on those beaches below, straight into the jaws of a trap. Those aircraft weren't idle targets. They were a storm waiting to break over the invasion fleet now steaming toward Peleliu. Stout's duty was to observe, not engage. He was trained to watch from distance, to radio coordinates, not pull a trigger. But experience had already taught him something the manuals never mentioned. Command decisions moved slower than war itself. By the time he landed, briefed intelligence, and waited for a strike force to form, those planes would vanish into revetments, or worse, take off toward the unsuspecting fleet. Every instinct told him to follow procedure. But looking down at that airfield, that death trap, he knew procedure might cost 1,000 lives. He tightened his grip on the control stick, engine rumbling beneath him, heart pounding with the weight of an impossible choice. Somewhere below, the enemy was preparing for the next blow of the Pacific War, and somewhere above, one man was deciding whether to follow his orders or save an army. The ocean below shimmered like hammered steel as dawn crept across the Pacific. High above it, Lieutenant Jack Mercer kept his F-6F Hellcat steady, the aircraft humming with the practiced confidence of a machine built for war. The mission was routine, or at least that's what naval intelligence promised. A simple reconnaissance sweep over the Micronesian atoll of Ngaru, an island the brass insisted had been neutralized weeks earlier. No fighters. No fuel, no reason to expect trouble. Mercer didn't argue. Recon pilots rarely did. Their job wasn't to question intel, it was to record it. He flicked the switch for the automatic camera. It clicked rhythmically, capturing frame after frame of turquoise water, coral ridges, and dense jungle canopy. The Hellcat glided forward like a bird of prey, silent except for its steady engine rumble. Below, the terrain began to shift. The first sign was a thin ribbon of cleared earth cutting through the treason airstrip, long enough for fighters, maybe even twin-engine bombers. The second sign was the smoke. Not the drifting haze of abandoned wreckage, but the disciplined, vertical columns of active fuel fires, fresh, controlled. Mercer frowned. The intel brief had been blunt. Airfield rendered inoperable. No Japanese aircraft reported. That wasn't what the Hellcat's camera was seeing now. He rolled slightly to the left to bring the strip into full view, expecting to spot charred, twisted remnants of planes destroyed weeks earlier. Instead, he saw motion, organized, purposeful motion. Dozens of ground crew in khaki uniforms rushed between parked aircraft. Tools glinted in the sun. Engines coughed. Mechanics guided fuel trucks into position. Mercer's breath locked in his chest. Japanese Zeros sleek, white-painted fighters lined up wingtip to wingtip. Beside them sat squat, lethal IHD-3A dive bombers. And behind those, the unmistakable silhouettes of twin-engine Mitsubishis, their bomb racks already loaded. He counted quickly. 5, 12, 19, too many. This wasn't an abandoned field. It was a launch site, a staging point, and the timing couldn't have been worse, because right now, as Mercer watched from above, the U.S. Navy's Task Force 58 was advancing toward the Palau Islands, tens of thousands of men aboard transports, destroyers and carriers preparing for the next major thrust into Japanese-held territory. The invasion fleet was days, maybe even hours away from entering the kill zone. If these aircraft launched first, the approaching armada would be torn apart. Mercer swallowed, the adrenaline sharpening his senses. His training was clear: observe, record, report. Recon pilots weren't meant to improvise. They were the eyes of the fleet, not the fists. But orders didn't erase reality. And the reality unfolding beneath his wings was catastrophic. By the time he returned to the carrier, filed his reconnaissance roll, and waited for command to analyze it, the Japanese would scatter their planes into tree-lined revetments. Camouflage nets would drop, crews would disperse. The airfield would vanish beneath a shell of deception. And if the Japanese were truly preparing a counterstrike, the air would soon roar with engines the moment the Hellcat disappeared over the horizon. Too late, too slow, too costly. Mercer tightened his grip on the control stick. His heart hammered the inside of his ribs like a trapped animal. Below, a Zero's engine sputtered to life. The propeller spun, then another. And another. They were preparing to launch. He wasn't supposed to act. But he wasn't supposed to watch an entire fleet die, either. He checked his ammunition. Full load of .5 Ocal machine guns, sufficient for a dogfight, but nowhere near what a full strike package would bring. He had one plane. They had an airfield. The odds were impossible, but impossibility had never stopped pilots before him. And it wasn't going to stop him now. Mercer banked hard right, rolling the Hellcat into an attack position. His stomach lifted as the blue sky inverted and the world flipped upside down. In that moment, suspended between duty and instinct, he understood exactly what he was about to do. This wasn't in the manual. This wasn't in any briefing. This was survival. He leveled out at attack altitude, the airfield growing larger in his gun sight. Anti-aircraft crews were already scrambling, black-clad figures racing to man their flak guns. They hadn't expected a lone American fighter this deep behind the front lines, let alone one diving straight at them. The first tracers sliced upward, glowing orange threads cutting through the air. Mercer felt the Hellcat shudder as he dropped to treetop height. Leaves whipped past his canopy. The roar of the engine drowned out everything: fear, doubt, logic. He aligned the crosshairs with the first row of Zeros, squeezed the trigger. The .5 Ocals erupted, a deafening barrage that sent shells ripping across the runway. Fuel drums burst like firecrackers. Wings snapped, engines exploded in showers of metal and flame. Ground crews scattered as the Hellcat carved a path of destruction straight through the Japanese formation. Mercer pulled up sharply, the G-forces crushing him into his seat. Smoke trailed behind him. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Flames climbed skyward. Black plumes curled into the morning air. He didn't have long. One pass, maybe two. That was all he could survive. But he had already made his choice. If the fleet was going to reach those beaches alive, this airfield needed to burn, and Jack Mercer was going to be the spark. The sky on the morning of September 15, 1944, was a bruised canvas of gray and amber as the invasion fleet surged toward Peleliu. Ships of every size, destroyers, transports, cruisers, moved in precise formation, cutting through the dawn mist like ghosts of steel. The sea rumbled with the steady thunder of engines, a sound that carried weight, purpose, and the looming promise of violence. Lieutenant Jack Mercer stood along the flight deck rail, his flight gear half-zipped, goggles hanging loosely around his neck. The salt wind pressed against his face, sharp and cold, and far ahead he could see the faint outline of Peleliu's ridges, dark, jagged shapes rising from the horizon. It was time. Commander Albright approached, the deck vibrating faintly beneath his boots. He held Mercer's helmet under his arm. "Morning," Albright said. Mercer gave a small nod. "Morning, sir." "You're cleared for flight? Medical says you're fit?" "I disagree, but they outrank me in white coats." Mercer smirked slightly. "I'll try to stay in one piece this time." "That would be ideal." Albright's expression shifted, lowering into that serious commander's stare Mercer knew meant business. "Your objective today isn't the airfield. That's already ash. The Marines are hitting the beaches now. They're going to need air cover every minute of the next 12 hours. We'll be rotating sorties nonstop." Mercer followed Albright's gaze toward the coast, where plumes of smoke began to blacken the sky as naval artillery pounded the island. Albright continued, The Japanese are dug in deep, caves, tunnels, camouflaged strong points. It's going to be hell down there. Close air support will make the difference between the men living or not. Mercer swallowed, feeling the weight settle across his chest. What's our target? He asked quietly. Orange Beach 2, Albright said. Help the Marines break through the coral ridges. There was no joke this time, no wisecrack. Just a mission, heavy and sharp as a blade. Minutes later, Mercer climbed into his F-6F Hellcat. The deck crew moved with rapid, rehearsed precision, pulling chocks, signaling engines, checking lines. The aircraft shook as he brought the engine to life, its prop spinning into a blur. He closed the canopy. The world outside dimmed. Reaper 3, you are clear for takeoff, came the tower voice through the headset. Mercer eased the throttle forward. The engine roared, the deck rushing beneath him. The tail lifted, the Hellcat surged toward the bow. Then he was off. The carrier dropped away behind him, swallowed by the brightening sea. The sky unfolded above him like an open battlefield. As he gained altitude, he joined his Squadron 6 Hellcats in tight formation. Their blue wings gleamed in the early sunlight, the white star insignias crisp and bold. Ahead the island grew clearer, Peleliu, a place that would become infamous. Smoke curled upward from naval bombardments. The shoreline was erupting under constant shelling, sand and coral blasting into the air. Landing craft crawled toward the beaches like steel beetles. Reaper Squadron, tighten up, Albright's voice crackled over the radio. Marines report heavy resistance on landing. Expect anti-aircraft fire, Mercer steadied his controls. His heartbeat sensed with the steady thrum of the engine. Below them, the first waves of Marines were storming the beaches under blistering heat and gunfire. Japanese defenders hidden in well-concealed bunkers opened up with machine guns, mortar, and artillery that tore through the surf. Mercer felt something twist in his gut. Squadron? We're going in. Albright ordered. The Hellcats rolled into a steep dive. The world transformed into a blur of smoke, flashes, and chaos. Mercer's altimeter spun downward as he aimed for a ridge, spitting thick bursts of machine gun fire at the Marines. Reaper 3, hit the bunker on the right. Albright shouted, I see it. Mercer pressed his thumb to the firing switch. The Hellcat's 6.50 caliber guns roared, tracers streaking downward like burning paintbrush strokes. The rounds tore into the bunker's camouflage netting, ripping through the firing slit. The bunker didn't explode, but its guns stopped. He pulled up sharply, forces crushing him into the seat. Black flak puffs bloomed around him as Japanese gunners tried to track the Hellcats. A shell burst close to his right wing, rattling the whole aircraft. Watch the flak! Someone yelled, I know. Mercer grunted as he jinked left. He glanced down. The Marines were inching forward, crawling through broken coral, diving behind what little cover existed. Corpsmen dragged wounded men across the sand. Tanks rolled forward slowly, their armor pinging with enemy rounds. Mercer's chest tightened again, not from injury, but from the sheer brutality of what he saw. They needed every second of support he could give. Reaper Squadron. Second pass. Albright ordered. They lined up again. Mercer targeted a cluster of palm trees camouflaged for an entrenched machine gun nest. Rockets whooshed from under his wings, streaking into the cover. The explosion sent debris and sand flying. Good hit. Reaper 3. Albright radioed, but Mercer didn't feel pride. He felt urgency. The Marines were still pinned in several sectors, and time moved differently in battle, slower for the men on the ground, faster in the air. For the next hour, they flew pass after pass, guns, rockets, strafing runs slicing through enemy positions with precision. Smoke darkened the sky. Heat shimmered off the island below. Even from altitude, Mercer could feel the intensity radiating upward like a furnace. Finally, as they circled for another run, Albright spoke. Marines report breakthrough on the ridge. Air support holding steady. We did our part, boys. Mercer exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. As they turned back toward the carrier, he looked once more at the beach, now crawling with movement. As the Marines pressed inland, he knew the battle ahead would be long, brutal, unforgiving, but he also knew this. Their sacrifices today had carved a path forward, and he would fly again tomorrow. Because war didn't ask for rest. It asked for resolve. The sun had climbed high over Peleliu by the time Lieutenant Jack Mercer completed his third sortie of the day. Heat radiated off the coral landscape in shimmering waves, turning the island into a furnace of blinding light and rising smoke. From the air, Peleliu looked less like a battlefield and more like a living creature scarred, smoking and refusing to die. Below him, the Marines pushed inland, inching through a labyrinth of caves, ridges, and ravines carved into the island's spine. The Umberburgal Mountains, nicknamed the Bloody Nose Ridge, towered just ahead of the lines, their jagged limestone peaks rising like broken teeth. Those ridges would become some of the deadliest ground ever fought over in the Pacific. Reaper 3. You're clear to return to the Hornet, the carrier's radio officer called. Mercer angled his Hellcat toward the horizon. His fuel gauge hovered near empty. Sweat soaked his flight suit. And yet, looking back at the dark ridges spewing bursts of enemy fire, he felt torn guilty even. The men below didn't get to fly away. They stayed, they endured, they bled for every yard of ground. Landing back on the USS Hornet should have felt like relief. Instead, Mercer's legs shook as he climbed down from the cockpit. Deck crews swarmed the aircraft, rearming and refueling it for the next pilot. The smell of fuel, salt, and hot metal mingled with the thick odor of the sea. Commander Albright met him beside the arresting cables. "You're running on fumes," he said. "You push any harder, you'll glide in on prayer alone." Mercer wiped his forehead with a trembling hand. "How bad is it down there?" Albright's sigh said everything, worse than expected. "Marines are taking fire from positions we didn't even know existed." Japanese dug tunnels into the cliff's entire networks. "They're popping up everywhere." Mercer nodded grimly. He had seen flashes of movement in cracks of the ridges, muzzle bursts hidden among the limestone shadows. No bunker stayed destroyed for long. No line stayed quiet. "They'll need more fire support," Mercer said, "and they'll get it," Albright replied. "But right now, you need food, water, and 10 minutes where you don't faint." Mercer managed a faint smirk. 10 minutes won't be enough. It never is." Inside the ready room, pilots sprawled across chairs, boots propped on tables, some half asleep, others staring blankly at the mission board. Sweat stained their uniforms. No one joked. No one bragged. Mercer sank into a seat, the room spinning slightly. The DOC handed him a canteen. "Drink," she ordered. Slowly, he obeyed. Through the open door. The sound of another launch echoed the metallic thunder of engines firing, wheels clattering across the deck, propellers screaming as another Hellcat took to the sky. The cycle never stopped. Albright stepped into the room again. Holding a clipboard, "All right, listen up," he said. "New orders from the fleet. Japanese resistance is stronger than intel predicted. They're not retreating and they're not breaking. They're fighting to the last man." A ripple of silence passed through the room. No one needed to be told what that meant. High casualties. Prolonged ground combat. Endless close air support. "The Marines are counting on us," Albright continued. "They can't reach those ridges without us softening them first. So we fly until the job's done." "Understood?" Every pilot nodded. Mercer felt the weight settle across his shoulders again. Exhaustion was a luxury. Doubt was a burden they didn't get to carry. The men dying on the coral ridges didn't have the option to stop. And neither did they. Hours later, Mercer was back in the air. The sky over Peleliu had darkened into a burned orange haze as fires raged across the island. Smoke coiled upward in thick towers. On the ground, Marines fought yard by yard, scaling the razor-sharp coral slopes that sliced at their boots and uniforms. Japanese soldiers fired from cave mouths, disappearing before counterfire could land. Mercer banked into position. "Reaper 3, target the cave at grid 7. Came Albright's voice. Mercer rolled into a dive, the Hellcat trembling as it cut through rising heat. Tracers whipped past his canopy as Japanese gunners tracked him. He fired a burst into the cave mouth straight, steady. Deadly. The explosion shook the ridge. As he climbed out of the run, he saw something that stayed with him forever, a squad of Marines scrambling up the slope behind the blast, taking cover in the newly cleared gap. Advancing with brutal determination, he realized then that their lives depended on every pass he made, every bullet. Every rocket. Every second they stayed in the sky. This wasn't just support. It was survival. As dusk settled, Mercer made his final pass of the day. The flames from burning palm trees cast flickering light across the shattered ridges. Peleliu was not a battlefield. It was a crucible, and everyone in it, airmen and infantry alike, was being pushed to their breaking point. But the mission wasn't over, not even close. When we look back at battles like Peleliu, it's easy to see only the statistics, the maps, the cold numbers etched into history books. But behind every ridge stormed, every flight launched, every order carried out, there were human beings, men who stepped into fire knowing the odds, knowing the cost, and choosing to go anyway. These pilots didn't just fly missions. They flew lifelines. Every strafing run, every rocket fired, every moment they held formation under flak wasn't for glory or recognition. It was for the Marines clawing their way up a ridge with nothing but grit and desperation on their side. And the Marines, they fought mile by mile through a landscape designed to break them. Heat that blistered skin, coral that cut through boots, enemy fire erupting from tunnels that seemed endless. They weren't just fighting soldiers, they were fighting an island, carved into a fortress, yet they kept moving. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this: history isn't shaped by machines or strategies alone. It's shaped by ordinary men who refuse to surrender to impossible circumstances. Men who dig deep when everything around them tells them to stop. Men whose courage outlasts the battlefield. And that's why these stories matter, because long after the echoes of gunfire fade, what remains is the reminder that sacrifice has a face, bravery has a heartbeat, and freedom, any freedom worth having, comes from those willing to stand in the fire for it. If you want to walk deeper into the battles that shaped the world, into the decisions that changed history, and into the lives of the people who lived it, then stay with us. There are more stories waiting in the shadows, more maps to unfold, more moments where history held its breath, and we're just getting started.